Hello and welcome to Read Read. Today I am finally glad to be talking about this mammoth of a book that I dedicated the first 3 weeks of December to finishing, Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace. As you can see, I took a lot of notes in this. I'm going to spare you and not go through every single note, as I did with the Dune video, but I will just talk about how, yes, this was a great read. I don't know if it exceeded expectations just because of how much this book is immensely hyped up, but more than any other book, it's shown me how immensely valuable a reread is going to be, and even just jumping back and rereading the first chapter again after you finish the book is pretty jaw-dropping. I'm going to really quickly, super quickly talk about plot, just because I know most people who are watching these have already read the book. But anyway, just on the off chance that you haven't, I'm going to spend 20-30 seconds on the plot and give you one parting piece of advice. Plot, there are three groups of people. There's the soft main character as Hal Incandenza, who is at a tennis academy. He's a student and he's realizing that he's addicted to smoking Bob Hope or marijuana, and he's trying to cut it, but he's trying to cut it out of his life, but he's starting to realize that he was actually addicted, and it's starting to have some negative effects on him. There are a group of recovering drug addicts who've been through the ringer. They're at Ennett House, which is geographically very close to the school, and the main central figure there is Don Gately, who is a recovering narcotics addict, and the third category are Hugh/Helen Steepley and Remy Marath, who are these investigators. They work for the government, and they are trying to find a videotape called Infinite Jest that was made by Hal, our first character's father, James Oren Incandenza, and the videotape is apparently so good that if you watch it, you enter a state of catatonic bliss and you cannot help but just continue watching it, similar to rats that are hooked up to pleasure machines and press the button over and over again until they die, foregoing food, sleep, etc. That's the plot of the book, and it's about how all of those characters are interact, how they're all related. Everything more or less revolves around either the Infinite Jest tape, or it revolves around the father, James Incandenza, who made it. It's very good. It's the form and structure of this book is, quote, like a Sierpinski gasket, which is like a fractal triangle. That's all I'm going to say. If you haven't read it, the only other parting piece of advice I'm going to mention is read Hamlet first. And yeah, ciao. For those of us who have still read it, I'm not even kidding when I say by just pure coincidence. So I chose to read the book on December the 1st, and I'd gotten to November the 28th, and I had finished the book I was reading, and I wanted to just read something really quick before I get to Infinite Jest, and I just randomly chose Hamlet, and I didn't even know anything about the connection. I didn't know that was where he got the name from. I get to the graveyard scene and he's talking about Paul Yorick as being a fellow of Infinite Jest, and it was this awesome, I feel like God just turned the lights off with the, anyway. Yorick is a fellow of Infinite Jest, and I just had this great mind blow moment. Felt destined that I was like, yeah, this is the right time to read Infinite Jest. There are a lot of themes and connections with Hamlet and Infinite Jest. Most of them I'm going to kind of ignore just because I feel so bad. I'm forgetting the video. Someone named Caleb made a video talking about the connections between Hamlet and Infinite Jest, but just a couple others that I want to mention that I don't think he mentioned in there is that the two janitors, so after again, of course, all the people who have read this, I'm jumping all around the book because of spoilers. After Stice's face has been kind of frozen to the wall, which that's another thing I'll get to, and Hal tries to sort of rip the face off, but it doesn't work. He goes down to find the two janitors to kind of get help, and one of the janitors refers to him as Prince Hal, and that was a funny little moment. And another thing that's a sort of a cool occurrence that's adjacent to a Hamlet reference is when the kids are down, because of the eschaton debacle, when they're down and they have to like kind of clean up everything, and they eventually find the fridge that has some food, and it's this big old like something's rotten in Denmark joke. I liked that. Sorry, I'm just reading from my notes. I really liked that the kids come across. They first mention picking up a doorless microwave, and that was something that was funny to me, because the device that was used as for the suicide of James Incandenza, they didn't even throw that out. They just kind of buried that, which I thought was very cool. I'm going to jump back to the book and quickly talk about my note taking, because this is excessive even for me. Most of these, the different colors mostly don't mean anything. Red is just sections. The purple, very interspersed, but they are the sections that are written in first person, and everything else is just because I ran out of a certain color and needed to use another one, and those are just clues or connections that I wanted to jump between. So for example, I remember thinking that it was really weird in page 32, 33 that Hal has a phone conversation with Oren, and after he hangs up, Mario asks who was on the phone, and Hal says, quote, "No one you know, I don't think." And I was like, oh, that's really weird. Why would he lie about it being his brother? And then it goes on, and you eventually find out that they have a really kind of Oren really doesn't like Mario. And so clues like that I tried to put in. Again, I went back, and after the section of talking about Roy Toney wanting to lie down with Wardine, I remember coming across Roy Toney again at one of the AA meetings, and I just wanted to go back and kind of create that connection. Some of the sections that I've wanted to reread, so there's of course Kate Gompert talking about suicide and being depressed. There is the first person section. I'm coming to the sensation of the worst nightmares, a sensation that can be felt while asleep or awake, is identical to those worst dreams form itself. The sudden intra-dream realization that the nightmare's very essence and center has been with you all along, even awake. It's just been overlooked. And that's something I want to come back to, but yeah, that's more or less all of the reasons that these horizontal tags are used. The top ones, these are extracts. These are the quotes that kind of make sense outside of the context of the book, and they're most of the things that you've probably already seen online anyway. Some of the quotes from the Halfway House, like you would care much less what people thought of you if you realized how seldom they do. Sometimes I quoted something because I just liked the language or the metaphor. For Oren Incandenza, number 71, morning is the soul's night, the day's worst time physically. He cranks the condo's AC way down at night, and still most mornings wakes up soaked, feetally curled, entombed in that kind of psychic darkness where you're dreading whatever you think of, and Oren being entombed, of course, comes back in the end. But before I do a more or less edited journey through my reading notes to just find the ones that I like, I'm going to go over again this list of some of the things that I think, although there are some really, really great videos online about Infinite Jest, particularly David Foster Wallace's interviews with Michael Silverblatt and others, and Chris Via's video, as well as the video on Hamlet that I'm apologizing that I've forgotten the name, but I'll link them all. I'm going to go over a couple of the points that stood out for me. Sections in first person and their potential unreliable narratorness. So, as everyone who has read the book will know, the first chapter, The Year of Glad, is the probably the furthest most in the future point, and it's one of the few chapters that is written in first person. Here there's another one of when he's talking about the nightmares that I already read, and then there's really not another first person chapter until we get to James Incandenza talking about his father, set in 1963. It doesn't jump, you don't start to get first person chapters again until the very end, after the whole sequence of basically until Hal is having his kind of breakdown at the university at the academy. And yeah, I started to think about the unreliable narratorness, because there are some really weird things. One of the most striking things that stood out to me was, of course, in the beginning, Hal is trying to converse, but all it's sounding like is him just screaming and like guttural, sub-harmonic, sub-animal screams, which is such a crazy idea. And because of how sparingly first person is used, it will stand out to you. And so I started to think about whether the sections that are written by James Incandenza are also have some unreliability to them. I have some kind of criticisms, I guess, about that first personness, mainly in that there's one weird section that's almost written in first person plural. It's like it constantly refers to as us. It's when Hal is walking around down in the tennis academy, like after the whole Stice face incident, and there's a sort of first person figure down there, but we don't really know who it is, and I'm like, I wonder if that's the ghost of James Incandenza talking in first person, but from a kind of third first person way. Kind of odd. I don't know how well used or executed the first person sections are. They may be, or at least they probably could have been more in the middle, because with the exception of, again, the James Incandenza one, there's pretty much a from 600 till 860, so an 800 page gap of not using any first person, which I thought was an interesting choice. The disjointed conversations between Hal and Oren over the phone are super interesting to me, because they remind me of, when you have like a text, when you're messaging on Messenger, and you want to say like 2 or 3 things, and you start the first message, send it, you're already starting the second message, but the person is replying to that first message, or that person has got the exact same thing going on for them, and they send a message, you send part 2 of that first message, they send part 2 of their first message, and then you send part 3. And it just, if you looked back at it without realizing, you would think these people are not even conversing. They're just saying their own stories, kind of in isolation, but zigzaggedly. And that's what so many of the conversations between Hal and Oren feel like. It's kind of trippy to read it, because Hal and Oren will just power through, ignore what the other person is saying, to just go on their own diatribe. And it's got this, again, it adds to this atmosphere, this weird spookiness. Suspicions of Oren being Mario's father. So I know this has been mentioned before. I know that the kind of there's the debates about whether it's CT, Charles Tavis, or not. I feel like I feel like the Charles Tavis is a bit of a red herring, because there is a section where kind of that's almost written from Charles's perspective, but not really. It's like a third person fixed, it's just over his shoulder, and he's talking about looking at Mario sleeping and fantasizing that it's his kid, but then, and for me that was just too obvious, it felt red herring-ish. Instead, there's later on in a footnote or in a section where Molly Notkin is talking, she's talking about how Avril Incandenza, the mother, more or less fucked everything with a Y chromosome, including sexually abusing their son, Oren. And of course I noted that because it was an important thing, an important plot point, but I feel like another clue was that Avril apparently traced the name of the person with whom she was having an affair in like the car window, and when it fogged up again, he saw the name, and tracing also is something that Oren does when he has sex. He traces infinity symbols on the people, and I thought that that could be a possibility, a possible connection. I don't know about the biology of Oren producing sperm. He would have been 8 years old when Mario was born. But yeah, just another possibility. I talked about Oren being kind of waking up entombed, and I liked again that there's a really sort of sick coming back to it where the first really in Oren moment that we get in his life is talking about him trapping the cockroaches and suffocating them with their own thing, and then again it comes back to the end with how he's being tortured by the Swiss hand model. So that's another connection that I really liked. Okay, this is a big one. I need to go and find endnote number 269 because this was the interaction or discussion between Hugh Steepley and Marlon Bain, or one of the Bains, and there's a lot of stuff that you get. It's basically this chapter where it's talking about Oren's kind of fucked up relationship with his mom, where how he was just like everyone in the family was so bad at lying, but it was sort of talking about him becoming a compulsive liar. And sorry, I just found it. A so-called word appeared on a fogged window of Miss Incandenza's pale yellow Volvo, and the word cast a conjugal pole in all sorts of directions. Paul. So yeah, word as being another idea for maybe it being the infinity symbol. This is the one where, but anyway, this whole section is the one where he's talking about Oren killing the dog, Samuel Johnson, and then there's this whole section about whether it's abuse. And I got to the end of it and was just kind of thinking that Oren wrote it, that it was not actually written by a person. And it just had that idea of like, yes, being really close, but also Oren being a compulsive liar, and it could have been an opportunity for him to kind of bitch and complain about his mum without having it be literally him bitching and complaining about it. And I wanted your guys' opinion. It's the it's footnote number 269, the saprogenic greetings from apparently coming from old mate Mr. Bain. Yeah, let me know what you think. I that was something that stood out to me as, this seems like it could very well have been written by Oren. Okay, I'm gonna jump into my big criticism of the book, and it is Wallace's use of vernacular. There are some times when he uses it like very explicitly, the sections that are written from, I don't remember whose perspective it's written, but it's the one where it's talking about Wardine and Roy Toney. There's obviously the section that is written from yours truly that talks about Bobby C's eventual kind of overdose and death with poor Tony. But pretty much what I'm beating around the point to get to is that I don't think Wallace does he really loves to switch back and forth between omnipotent third person narrator and vernacular. So there are times when perspectives or sections that are from Don Gately's perspective where Wallace will say things that Don Gately definitely doesn't know, use terms to describe the world around him that Don Gately doesn't know, but also indulge in calling people fag, gook, chink, nigger, etc. Because it's set from Don Gately. And there's even a footnote that says like, it's unfortunately a shame that nigger is the only word Don Gately knows for black people. And it's like, is it a shame, or are you just kind of using it? Are you taking advantage of the fact that this section is from Don Gately to use these slurs, but then also use some be able to indulge and be a writer, or be very smart and describe things that would be outside of the vocabulary of Don Gately. And this is all obviously pre Gately being visited by the Wraith and like downloading information Matrix style. That was the only section where it really stood out to me. and it was just a little bit like I get what you're doing, but it's not like this is a quote or anything. Like, you're describing this from a neutral third person perspective. And so it kind of stood out like a sore thumb. It really felt like he was indulging in vernacular to use those slurs. That's my big criticism of the book. That's my biggest criticism of the book. I wouldn't say it's a massive criticism. But yeah, also, I'm a musician, slight nitpicky things. Unless he's making a really oblique Simpsons reference, he does talk about a sustained high B sharp at some point. Just say C. Like, come on. And again, that kind of goes back into the omnipotent narrator. I think it happens during Don Gately's perspective, and it's like, Don Gately doesn't have perfect pitch. If he had perfect pitch, he probably wouldn't be hearing things as B sharp. Anyway, so yeah, there's a vacuum that makes a minor D sound, which just feels janky. You would say D minor, of course. And someone absent-mindedly humming chords is not accurate, like absent-mindedly humming arpeggios, maybe. Chords, no. But yeah, sorry, those are just little nitpicky things where I know that it's like, yes, I'm a musician, so I'm going to instantly just kind of gravitate to seeing those things. But again, he said that this book was line edited twice, and everything was meticulously researched. I know you could, those little things are just a bit janky, when I hear them. It's mentioned that Madame Psychosis's mental name for James is Infinite Jim, but one of Jim's films that is unfinished was called Infinite Jim. So I don't know what was happening there, if there's some, like, it's never mentioned that she tells him that name, in the same way that Aura never calls never uses the phrase the mad stork or the sad stork to him, but James kind of actually had a film that was called Infinite Jim, which was kind of weird. Another weird reoccurring motif that stood out to me was the yellow and black smiley face, like the Watchmen smiley face, because we heard it in two very different areas or different sections. There's Don Gately's dream of being grabbed by like the shepherd outside after like the standing up, but then also one of the wheelchair assassins, when they go to look for the master tape and they kill Lucian Antioli, one of them is wearing a kind of yellow smiley face ski mask, and so that was a kind of a weird connection. So the scene where Stice's face gets stuck to the wall, and I really liked that scene, even though it's really kind of Mortal Kombat fatality brutal. I really liked that scene was a kind of weird oblique reference to something that's been mentioned the whole time, which is this face in the darkness, also a nickname for Stice, and Hal, for example, sleeping with a torch near his bed to help with that face, that thing that you see that gives you nightmares, and him trying to sort of like rip the face off and reveal it, but it not working, and then later on someone else comes and like tears the face off. I thought that was a funny kind of turning an allegory into a physical thing, into a physical object, in a kind of macabre and twisted way. Also, this is a weird little nitpick, but with the exception of some of the sections that are written in vernacular, Wallace talked about how he feels like the book is pretty American, or he talked about it, and he didn't know how well it could be translated. And I kind of just disagree. I didn't really get any perspective, or I didn't get the vibe at any point that the book was in like, Arno Schmidt levels of like, you just look at the original German and you're like, how the hell could this ever be translated? Okay, I'm going to really quickly just skim through and find some quotes and extracts that I like to read, and hopefully this will be pretty edited. So, the Doctor was anxious that his failure to have any idea what the girl was referring to would betray itself and accentuate her feelings of loneliness and psychic pain. Classic unipolars were usually tormented by the conviction that no one else could hear or understand them when they tried to communicate, hence jokes, sarcasm, the psychopathology of unconscious arm rubbing. Shtit then falls into the sort of silence of somebody who's enjoying mentally rewinding and replaying what he just came up with. Love that one. Oh my god, talk about getting hit by a fucking truth bomb. The section where he's talking about different plateaus. He's talking about the complacent type of plateau. Then what John considers, John Wayne, the number one tennis player, then what John considers maybe the worst type because it can cunningly masquerade as patience or humble frustration. You've got the complacent type who improves radically until he hits a plateau and is content with the radical improvement he's made to get to that plateau, and doesn't mind staying at the plateau because it's comfortable and familiar, and he doesn't worry about getting off it. And pretty soon you find he's designed a whole game around compensating for the weaknesses and chinks in the armor the given plateau represents in his game. Still, his whole game is based on the plateau now, and little by little, guys he used to beat start beating him, locating the chinks of the plateau, and his rank starts to slide, but he'll say he doesn't care. He says he's in it for the love of the game, and he always smiles, but there gets to be something sort of tight and hangdog about his smile, and he always smiles and is real nice to everybody and real good to have around, but he keeps staying where he is while other guys hot plateau and he gets beat more and more, but he's content. Holy shit, man. Talk about reading something that just fucking calls you out. Because, yeah, have reached certain plateaus with music before, and I'm glad that I've gotten over some of them, but yeah. Talk about reading something that's just your feelings, your heretofore undescribable feelings made manifest. This is a big long section of Jim's father talking to him. Things were different when I was growing up, Jim. I hate saying something like this. This things were different when I was a lad type cliche shit. The sort of cliche fathers back then spouted, assuming he said anything at all. But it was different. Our kids, my generation's kids, this post-Brando crowd, Marlon Brando, you knew kids can't like us or dislike us or respect us or not as human beings, Jim. Your parents. No, wait. You don't have to pretend you disagree. Don't. You don't have to say it, Jim, because I know it. I could have predicted it, watching Brando and Dean and the rest, and I know it, so don't splutter. I blame no one your age, boyo. You see parents as kind or unkind or happy or miserable or drunk or sober or great or near great or failed the way you see a table square or a Montclair lip red. You kids today somehow don't know how to feel, much less love, to say nothing of respect. We're just bodies to you. We're just bodies and shoulders and scarred knees and big bellies and empty wallets and flasks to you. I'm not saying something cliche like you take us for granted so much as I'm saying you cannot imagine our absence. We're so present it's ceased to mean. We're environmental, furniture of the world. Jim, I could imagine that man's absence. Jim, I'm telling you, you cannot imagine my absence. It's my fault, Jim. Home so much, limping around, ruined knees, overweight, under the influence, burping, non-slim, sweat-soaked in that broiler of a trailer, burping, farting, frustrated, miserable, knocking lamps over, overshooting my reach, afraid to give my last talent the one shot it demanded. Talent is its own expectation, Jim. You either live up to it or it waves a hanky, receding forever. Use it or lose it, he'd say over the newspaper. I'm just afraid of having a tombstone that says, here lies a promising old man. Its potential may be worse than none, Jim. Then no talent to fritter in the first place, lying around guzzling because I haven't the balls to... God, I'm so sorry, Jim. You don't deserve to see me like this. I'm so scared, Jim. I'm so scared of dying without ever being really seen. Which is, man, that's, aside from being an exceptionally striking thing, I think that this is... this section, I almost never hear people talking about it, but it definitely harkens back to some of the ideas of citizenship and the difference in the generations that Wallace talks about in that kind of unedited interview. Please learn the pragmatics of expressing fear. Sometimes words that seem to express really invoke. And here's another big one that I'm sure has been mentioned before, but the little mentioned paradox of substance addiction is that once you are sufficiently enslaved by a substance to need to quit the substance in order to save your life, the enslaving substance has become so deeply important to you that you will all but lose your mind when it is taken away from you, or that sometime after your substance of choice has been taken away from you in order to save your life, as you hunker down for required AM and PM prayers, you'll find yourself beginning to pray to be allowed literally to lose your mind, to be able to wrap your mind mind in an old newspaper or something and leave it in an alley to shift for itself without you. This is the big section where he's talking about the things you learn if you're hanging around a Boston halfway house. That most substance addicted people are also addicted to thinking, meaning they have a compulsive and unhealthy relationship with their own thinking. That 99% of compulsive thinkers' thinking is about themselves. That 99% of this self-directed thinking consists of imagining and then getting ready for things that are going to happen to them. And then, weirdly, that if they stop to think about it, that 100% of the things they spend 99% of their time and energy imagining and trying to prepare for, all the contingencies and consequences of, are never good. That there might not be angels, but there are people who might as well be. A cool descriptive device. It was during this period that Oren had characterized the mums to Hal as a kind of contortionist with other people's bodies, which Hal had never been able to forget. And I have to, just before I forget, there's this great proverb where John Wayne gets sort of drugged and goes on this like rant over the intercom, where he describes somebody as being so full of himself he could shit limbs. Okay, so here's an interesting one where Hal's talking about his anxieties of like how the mums feels about Mario. Despite himself and showing a striking lack of insight into the mum's psyche, Hal fears that Avril sees Mario as the family's real prodigy, an in-bent savant-type genius of no classifiable type, a very rare and shining thing, even if his intuition, slow and silent, scares her. His academic poverty breaks her heart. The smile he puts on each AM without fail since the suicide of their father makes her wish she could cry. This is why she tries so terribly hard to leave Mario alone, not to hover or ring, to treat him, ring like W-R-I-N-G, to treat him so less specially than she wants. It is for him. It is kind of noble, pitiable. Her love for the son who was born a surprise transcends all other experiences and informs her life. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed my video on Infinite Jest. Please let me know if there's anything, any more things that you liked about the book. I reckon I'll reread the book again within the next maybe 5 years. But yeah, thank you for watching this video. I hope you have a great Christmas and a great New Year. And I'll see you for another videos. I'm planning on doing a bookshelf tour next. So yeah, I'll see you for that video. Thanks for watching.